Hi, I'm Christina Korp. I'm Buzz's mission director. I'm in charge of all his appearances, media, PR, social media. I've inadvertently become his mother in the 9.5 years that we've been together. So we've done a number of these Q&As, and this is a way to get to know some of the iconic images and get to know Buzz a little bit. So here we are. Hi, Buzz.
Hi. I'm still talking about 48 years ago, for people who don't remember. And there's been a lot of things going on in between, but most of them have been preparing for items, adventure, exploration into the future. And that is my life. I've served my country since I took an oath at the military academy at 17 years old. That's right. And I continue to serve now. Retired in the Air Force, very proud to have been a part of the Apollo program.
So we're going to start a little. Can you guys hear him? His mic didn't.
Are you trying to be louder?
It doesn't look like it's on. I didn't think it looked like the mic was on. Here, I can talk loud. Here, we'll give this to you. Yeah, the mic doesn't. Check, check, check. That's not on. It doesn't have a light.
I'm afraid to do this after you.
Yeah.
Whoop.
Yeah, it's not on. All right, well, I can talk loud because I'm a singer and I've got a loud mouth. So we're going to touch on some of Buzz's really iconic photos. So we're just going to give you a little glimpse of his exploration life, or at least his space life especially. So this photo has become very famous. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this photo, Buzz?
This was on my first mission in space, November '66. We were taking pictures at night of the star systems, and it's a ultraviolet camera, time exposure, 5-10 seconds. But between the night passes, we obviously went around and the sun was shining, so we were sightseeing pretty much. And I looked at the camera and I just said, well, why don't I just take a picture myself? And it turned out to be the first selfie in space in 1966. But it set the real high standard. If you want a real selfie, the camera has to be attached to the spacecraft. And then you take a picture. So it turned out to be the most expensive selfie stick you could ever imagine.
And an awesome photo. All right, so we're going to...
Now, the lighting isn't all that good, but see, that wasn't my fault. It was the way the spacecraft was pointed, and that was Jim Lovell's fault. He was inside the commander.
All right, well, we're going to get you to the moon because that's, of course, what most people remember Buzz from is Apollo 11. So this next picture, let's see if it'll work. So actually, no, you're not at the moon yet. He's on his way.
Yeah, this picture actually is en route with the command module and the lunar module. We had to separate from the upper stage and turn around and dock with the lunar module, separate it, then the upper stage went on to orbit the sun. And there was a period where I could then go through the tunnel as we were approaching the moon, and that's why I have this, not a spacesuit, but this is the garment that we wore inside command module and for my inspection of the lunar module. And so while I was doing that, wearing the Omega watch, of course, in full view, Neil put his head down through the tunnel, upside down, of course, and took this picture of me and in front of the triangular windows that were the two windows on the lunar module. And that is the instrument panel on the one side. This actually would be Neil's window on the left side.
And you Actually, he recently put that, we got that jacket out of storage because we're doing a documentary about Buzz's life and about his efforts toward the future. So we took that jacket out of the safety deposit box, and he wore it
Well,
recently.
we stored it. We actually loaned it to the
It was
Smithsonian.
Smithsonian for a long time, yeah.
They would dry clean it every so often.
I'm not sure we did that, but it still fits. That's what's amazing.
Sure does, yeah.
All right, so now we are going to get you to the moon. And this very iconic photo of the boot print on the first moon landing.
The boot print on this talcum-like surface was not like sand or just plain old dust that would sort of fall away. It made a very distinct print, and it fascinated me. And I thought, gee, we got to really take a good picture of this, but it really ought to be a before and after. So I picked out a nice smooth spot, took a picture before, put my foot down, and this turned out to be quite a representative picture of a human print on the moon. Now it looks a little lonely, so I decided to take another one, not quite as famous as this. So I put my boot down and moved it a little bit so you could see the boot itself and a little bit of the print. Now, the prints, of course, or the boot prints, of course, are fairly small, but each time you put your foot down when you're walking, it sprays the dust to either side, and it changes the color of the surface. And so, of course, we reported on just what we had done during the time outside the capsule. And then a year or two ago, there were some photos taken by Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter at fairly high altitude, and you could see the white part of the descent stage that was left on the moon, and a little bit of the experiments. And there was a crater behind us. And if you look carefully, you could see the darkened pathway where, while I was getting back in the spacecraft, Neil went back to take pictures of this crater that we had to avoid making the descent. And you can see that he came back on a slightly different path, and both of them are illuminated from space. I guess maybe it would be maybe 10 feet of a swath that would show up as a darker color. Technically, it's the albedo. I don't know how to spell it, but you can make a guess at it.
What his son says is his son Andy is an avid photographer, and what does he say about this photo?
Well, I got him checked out in scuba diving pretty early. I'd started diving in 1957, so I was fairly experienced on my first mission for EVA, where the selfie in space was. I became quite comfortable underwater, neutral buoyancy. So my son and I are both members of a long-standing diving group, and Andy takes a lot of pictures above the water, nice scenes underwater with sharks, and he takes pictures of me, thousands. Then he says, now Dad, you don't take very many pictures. You're the subject. People are taking pictures of you. And you know, you take a picture like that and it becomes famous. He said, that's not fair. And I said, well, you know, once you get it right, why would you want to keep trying other scenes, you know? Yeah. Stick with it.
All right, so we're going to, if it'll go, this is probably the most iconic image from Apollo 11.
It looks like it was posed, but it was not at all. I was walking this way toward the lunar module. Sometimes in the photo you can see a part of the probe that was touched the ground first. So I was walking this way, and Neil said, hey, hold it. So I stopped and looked at him. And if you look pretty close, you can see that the strap that's hanging down is not hanging down straight. It's hanging down at an angle, which means I was still turning, sort of. Only a few of us would notice that. But because this is so characteristic or iconic, because in the visor, you can see the reflection of the photographer, Neil, in his white spacesuit, and the shadow, and the lunar module, my shadow going out, and the lunar module, and I think you can see the flag and an experiment or two. So people look at this and they say, wow, that is so typical. You see the horizon and the black sky. That is such an iconic picture, and it has been used as a very classic. And people kind of ask me, well, tell me about that. And I said, wow, I got 3 words to describe this picture. Location, location, location.
What I love too, and I didn't know this, but if you look on his right hand that's hanging down, you can see a black strap. That is the Omega watch that he wore on the surface of the moon. And what I also like is most people don't realize that that's Buzz. A lot of people think it's Neil. So one time...
Again, you got to look pretty close, but there is a
name. Yeah, on the front.
On the indicator up here that we could read pressures.
One time on USA Today, they had a thing of the top 3 moonwalkers of all time, and it had that picture. It said Neil Armstrong. It had a picture of Michael Jackson, and then a picture of Buzz, number 3. And I said, look, you made 2 of the top 3 moonwalkers of all time. All right, so we've got tons of pictures of Apollo 11, but we don't have a lot of time. We just want to give you a little glimpse. So I'm going to go to something that not many people have seen yet, which is the South Pole. We went to the South Pole back in December.
I had been waiting for quite a while. I was a part of a group that was going to drive a Hummer with treads, special treads. We were going to drive that, but they couldn't quite get things together. So I finally became part of a group here, because before this I'd been to the North Pole on a Russian nuclear icebreaker. It makes a lot of noise. I've been down to the Titanic, quite a few miles down. Takes an hour and a half just to sink down. Not scuba, this is a yellow French submarine that we were in. But I finally got to the South Pole. Now, believe it or not, all this winter gear makes it a lot harder to maneuver around than it did in the spacesuit. And they parked us. We went up there, and a sort of ancient airplane didn't have any pressure in it. And you may not realize it, but the South Pole is at 9,000 feet. So we were unpressurized, and we get there, and they didn't park us all that close. So here I am walking with this heavy stuff on, and a little bit of snow that you have to trudge through. And I get out of breath when I walk from one gate to another in the airport.
You were singing to me, though. You were singing 99 bottles of beer. I don't know why.
No, I don't. Well,
must have been the elevation.
That was maybe when I started out. But I began to get kind of out of breath. And of course, it became a little overblown as to the difficulties. So they evacuated me down because I was a little out of breath. But you know, we guys, we don't do things because they're easy. We do things because they're hard. That's what the president said years before.
You can't see it, but he did, so you'll notice he's got 3 Omega watches on right now. He's got his, I call it his Frankenstein watch because this is his concoction of 2 faces. So he did have this on at the South Pole, so I just realized that's been at the South Pole.
This is the glitzy one, automatic, gold, chronometer. And this is a space station watch. It's got a lot of different time zones in it. And it's quite complex.
And then there's the Speedmaster.
And then this is the Speedmaster for the 60th anniversary. Now this one I'm going through some modifications to make it for a Mars watch so that here on the Earth you can tell what time it is on Mars.
Look out
time
for that.
zones
Yes.
there.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
We've only got a couple more minutes for this group buzz, so we're gonna if we gave him this session, just put this up, he would talk about Mars for the next 5 hours. So unfortunately, we don't have time for that. But I know you guys probably want to do a couple questions, so I think we might have time for maybe a couple questions. Depends upon how long it takes you to answer.
Special orbits going to Mars.
Yeah.
Cycling orbits that are continuous. I discovered these going back and forth to the moon, and then I used the same sequence, gravity assist, to use trips to Mars, 6 months to Mars. Then it brings people back about 1.5 years, 2 years later, 6 months back. Then it takes people there again.
So the good news is, if you have an HTC Vive, you can see our virtual reality experience called Cycling Pathways to Mars. And it is a visualization of his plans for the future at the moon and Mars. It's not quite as technical as Buzz would explain it. It's more of a visualization, and it's awesome. And it also is a 3D environment of Buzz where Buzz landed on the moon. So it's awesome. It's like where he and Neil were on the moon. It's incredible if you get a chance to see it. So let's take a couple questions. Anybody have a question? There's a gentleman there.
Buzz.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Science and optimism took you to the moon, and we seem to live in a time of pessimism and scientists marching. What do you feel about all that?
Pessimism.
Yeah, and scientists marching to be recognized, and there seems to be a feeling that science doesn't have the validation it should.
Oh, science has been driving so much of what we've been doing. We've been sending rovers to Mars. Curiosity. 2 rovers went there 12 years ago. One of them is still working. But it takes 20 minutes maybe for the message of pictures that they take at Mars to come back. So when we're simulating things where we can control activities at Mars from Earth, it has to be a specific, regular routine like refueling, and we need to practice that on the Earth. Then we do it at the moon, where we get international partners to join us in the future, in the 20s, and then in the 30s, we have cycling orbits and send people to Mars.
He is driving every day. This is what he thinks about all the time. So he's an optimist. We're optimists up here. So, all right, let's take another question. Anybody else? This yet?
You were the first man carrying a watch. What was the role of the watch while walking on the moon? Did you have to look up the time?
It was a little difficult to activate the stopwatch to time things. We didn't need to do that, really. We were in communication with the Earth all the time, and so we sort of felt at home. We could talk to each other. But we wore the watch, and we kept it set on the time of the shifts of the people back in mission control. And they were on an 8-hour shift. So here we are on the moon going around, but we knew what time it was in Houston, Texas, all the time.
I think one more.
Last question. What do you hope to in your lifetime regarding space exploration? Is there anything else you'd still like to see achieved?
Well, of course, I just grew up and hoped I'd maybe get to play football, and ended up pole vaulting for heights, flying in combat in the Korean War, on alert with nuclear weapons. Got into the space program, became a doctor of science, discovered better ways of doing rendezvous in space. Then after I left NASA, I turned that into cycling orbits, Earth and Moon, and then into Mars. And the plan that I'm developing is a complete plan. And I hope that it is something that gets developed into actuality when I'm not here anymore. So my mother was born the year the Wright brothers flew. My father, an aviation pilot, World War II. I was in the Korean War. And I got to go to the moon, and now I'm planning for humans to go to Mars. What better time to be here on the surface of the Earth than the fortunate life that I've had.
By the way, his mother's maiden name was Marion Moon. For real, people think this is a joke, but his mother's name was Moon before he married.
You ever had a candy bar, a Mars bar?
All right, Buzz, I think we're going to wrap up for this group.
Because, you know, the very first, or one of the first advertising campaigns we ever made for that watch spoke about cars, but it also spoke about other people that needed a good chronograph, like doctors, like anybody. But we found, just a couple of months ago in the archives, the very, very first ever published Omega leaflet that speaks about the Omega Speedmaster, and it was no less for the American market.
And one of the first assignments I got was to come up with a watch, because all they had in the spacecraft was digital, and all of the astronauts were test pilots, or jet jockeys, as a lot of people call them. And they always had a watch. It was a cheapy watch, as I recall. It wasn't much, but even when they came out with the first digital watches on the jets, they took these cheapies and glued them on the console because they hated digital watches. So they wanted a watch they could wear. And it's typical. Everybody wears a watch. Do you need it today? You got the time on your phones and everything else, but it's something you wear, and they were basically the same.
We should
You'll see that in this collection, and that is very important when you develop a new product, you have always the DNA of the watch from 1957. So the first collection I would like to show you is what we call Speedmaster Racing. The watch is 44.25 millimeters wide, and it has our master chronometer certification. So for those who don't know, the watch went to COSC, to be a chronometer. But when we do that, you test only the movement. So Mr. Hayek wanted to have something in addition, particularly because we had also this revolutionary technology that allows the watch to go up to 15,000 Gauss. And the watch you have here at the end, here we used something new, racing drivers, and they could, of course, measure the speed with the tachymeter. Also, you have to remember that the Speedmaster was the first watch in 1957, when it was born, that had a tachymeter that was outside the dial. Usually, the tachymeter was painted on the dial, and Speedmaster was the first having that outside on the bezel. So now, many, many watches in the world have this bezel outside. So the watch you have here in front of the poster of the 60th anniversary